Hi, I'm Hobie1. I've made it back to the American River in the beautiful Ansel Hoffman Park. Today we're reading the Black Book of Secrets by F.E. Higgins. Chapter 27, fragment from the memoirs of Ludlow Fitch. Let's go. After I finished reading The Coffin Maker's Secret, we both looked at each other guiltily. Poor beggar, said Polly, quietly. It wasn't even his fault. There's a little bit more, I said, right at the bottom of the page. What does it say? Que nocent docent. Polly looked blank. I think it must be Latin. Latin? It's another language. Joe uses it sometimes. He says you can say more with fewer words. He likes that. Well, you'd better not ask him what it means, said Polly, quickly, or he'll know you've been snooping. I said nothing. I couldn't help feeling Joe would know anyway. I closed the book and put it away. I don't want to hear any more, said Polly, and I was glad. So we sat and waited for the storm to ease, just the two of us, in front of the fire, drinking soup, wrapped in blankets to keep warm. I think we both knew we were wrong to read the book, but Polly tried to shrug it off with a laugh. He'll never know, she said, trying to convince herself. Don't fret so much. By early evening, the wind had died down and the snow had eased. Polly stood up and stretched. I'll be off, she said. Mr. Ratchet'll be looking for his supper. Before she went, she looked at me nervously. You won't tell him, will you, Ludlow? I shook my head. If he finds out, I'll say it was just me. She grinned. He'll forgive you. Just stare at him with your big green eyes. Somehow, I didn't think that trick would work on Joe. 4 days later, although the worst of the storm was over, it was still dark and wintry and very cold. I kept the shop locked up. The hours passed slowly. I fed Saluki and swept the floor and dusted the display. I had plenty of time to think about what Polly and I had done, and by the fourth day I had managed to convince myself that I need not have worried. After all, no one had come to any harm. We didn't do it out of malice, just curiosity. At the back of my mind was the nagging doubt that Joe had set a trap for me, and although it hurt me to think that he didn't trust me, it was worse to know that he was right. But did that make it fair? Was there any person out there strong enough to resist looking? The night before his return, I was nearly asleep by the fire when I thought I heard a noise outside. By the time I opened the door onto the street, there was no one there. Only footprints under the window, large footprints. I knew who had made them, not from their size, but from the smell that lingered in the air. A Jeremiah Ratchet smell. On the fifth morning, Saluki set up a tremendous croaking, and a few seconds later, someone began rattling at the door. Ludlow, called a voice, let me in. It was Joe. I was very pleased to have him back, and I only hoped that I could hide my guilty feelings. He came in, looked the place over, and clapped me on the back. Good to see you kept the shop in order in my absence, he said. I had made sure that everything was in place. There was a terrible storm, I said before I could stop myself. Polly came by and sat with me for a while. I hadn't meant to tell him that, but when Joe looked at me in a certain way, I just had to say what was on my mind. I stared at the floor. I didn't want to reveal any more of my thoughts. I know, he replied. You know? He had read my mind? I've just seen her in the street, going to the butcher's. She told me all about it. My heart shuddered. I hoped that was all Polly had said. Anyone come knocking? Joe asked. I shook my head. I think Ratchet was sniffing round, though. Shouldn't surprise me. He's an inquisitive fellow. He's certainly not the first to spy at the window. Joe didn't just mean me. I remembered when Dr. Moldard came up, and he peeked in the window. Joe told me afterward he was certain someone had been outside, but right now I was interested in Ratchet. Why don't you do something about him? I urged. Is it really so unreasonable of the villagers to ask? Joe sighed. You must be patient, Ludlow. Why? What are we waiting for? Do you know what's ahead? This seemed to amuse him. Have you seen my crystal ball? He asked. If you have, I should very much like to know where it is. He was half laughing. But then he became serious again. I am no seer, Ludlow. Believe me, if I was, do you think I would be doing this? He gestured around the room. I wasn't going to let him off the hook this time. What exactly are you doing, Joe? Who are you? Why do you come here? If this is interesting to you, please be sure to boop the like button. You'll be helping out the video to spread to other people, helping me out, and thank you very much. He leaned back on the counter and stretched his long legs out in front of him. I am just an old man, Ludlow, trying to help those in need. But the book, the money, you give all the time. What do you get back? It doesn't have to be about taking. Don't you think it's enough to give? Why should I expect anything in return? I was beginning to understand, but it was not easy. I suppose I was still a thief at heart. My whole life in the city had been about taking for myself and taking care of myself. You've seen their faces, Joe continued. You know how they feel when they come at midnight and how they feel when they leave. Why should I want more than that? But they want more, I said. And that, Ludlow, is precisely my problem. He turned on his heel and went into the back room. I followed him. He pulled the black book out from under the mattress and stood by his bed, looking around. I've been thinking, he said. Perhaps we should put the book somewhere else. I couldn't imagine where. The room was hardly big enough for a choice of hiding places. Aha! He exclaimed a few moments later. I have just the place. You can look after it. He swooped down and slid it under my cushion. I was quite taken aback and struggled not to show it. Do you think it will be safe? In your hands? Said Joe with a wink. I'm sure of it. And now, speaking of books, there is a volume I wish to have. Come with me. And so we went to see Perigot Leafbinder. That is the end of chapter 27. Thank you for joining me. I'll catch you again in chapter 28.